Hello, my name is Leo, and welcome to a new tutorial by Blauw Films. First of all, I'd like to say, oh my god, thank you very much. Last time that I made a tutorial, we were still below the 1000 subscribers, and right now we are right above it, so thank you very much for subscribing, thank you very much to sticking around to the channel. I'm super excited to share what's next. So today we will be looking at how to create Neptune. Now, Neptune is a very interesting planet. It's the furthest away from the Sun in our solar system, making the longest orbit. Or well, some would say Pluto, I guess. But, you know. Now, Neptune is a gas giant, similar to the planets like Jupiter and Saturn, which means that we can be playing a lot around with the volume material in Cinema 4D and Corona Renderer, or in whatever render engine you'll be using. Before we dive into Cinema 4D, let's have a quick look at some of the info, or let's say the specs from Neptune. Now, the first thing we know is that Neptune has this very beautiful bluish color. That's because of the methane gas. We're still not exactly sure why Neptune is so much bluer than Uranus, as both of them actually consist of methane gas. When it comes to the planet's shape, it's basically just a spheroid, but it does have two large rings. These rings are something that's usually not included when you make a render of Neptune or where you see photographic reference. It's because these rings are super thin. And we won't actually be including them in this tutorial, but I will be making a separate tutorial similar in how I did the Saturn rings. One of the other important things for us to know is that Neptune has a radius of 24,622 kilometers. In Cinema 4D, I will be working with centimeters in my radius, just so we have a relatively small space scale. But I do like to be working with at least the correct numbers before the metric, so that in case I want to put all these planets together into the same scene, we would at least have the correct relative size between them. Here on the Voyager NASA website, we can see the pictures that have been taken by Voyager 2, and they are very interesting to look at. Like, this first classic one is basically what we will be aiming for in this tutorial, just making sure that we're able to get a nice wide to medium shot of Neptune. When it comes to generating a close-up, as you can see on this image over here, Neptune has these very nice fluffy volumetric clouds right on the surface. In this tutorial itself, I have not tackled the workflow of creating volumetric clouds all over the planet, and I will just be working with some cloud alpha maps for the wider angle shots. I will probably be making a second tutorial that will be covering generating volumetric clouds for any type of planets that you're interested in. Here you can see a picture of the two thin rings of Neptune, which are pretty far away from the planet itself. So in case you want to add them, at least here you can have a general idea of what their relative distance would be from one to another. This picture over here of Neptune being backlit is actually incredibly similar to this render I did of Neptune. And as you can see, especially the atmosphere color is matching very one-to-one. We will be diving into the atmosphere settings in a bit, and it's really one of the most important things when it comes to generating these planets. Making sure that the colors that are absorbed and the colors that are scattered stay as consistent as possible, and then it really doesn't matter where you shine the light on your model, and the results will be always very natural and very interesting. Now, if you've been following this channel for a while, you've been seeing some of the other planet tutorials we've been doing, you know how completely nitpicky I am when it comes to camera settings. And the camera settings of the Voyager 1 is really something to look into. So the Voyager has two cameras. One is equipped with a wide-angle lens, a 200, which, you know, it's a wide-angle lens for shooting planets. If this were to be shooting humans, this would be considered a pretty long lens. But the wide angle is 200mm with a 60mm diameter, pretty standard stuff, and an aperture of 4.17. This is something we tackled in the previous Mercury tutorial, but these cameras are sensitive to a very specific spectral range. And they're usually filtered out with a set of, as you can see here, 2 methane filters or sodium filters, and they make sure that the only color that comes in are the ones that they're specifically aiming for. And then afterwards in post-production, they will be able to color correct those images to create a as accurate as possible resemblance of what they would look like to our eyes. But at least they have the color information for them to do all the science and figure out what they need to know from these planets. The other lens they have on there is a narrow angle 1500 millimeter. This is for when they either need to be capturing some super high close-ups of the planet maps or for when the Voyager is at the furthest of its orbit. And here we have an aperture of 11.8, trying to get the planet more in focus. Now, I guess that's about it. That's all we need to know. So let's hop into Cinema 4D. Cool. Here we are in Cinema 4D. You can purchase this project file on the ArtStation store, and I tried making the texture map for free, but unfortunately, because it's like 21K, the file size is too big for ArtStation store to allow me to make it a free sale, so I had to put it at $1. I'm sorry. But either way, let's try to get into this. First of all, I created 3 copies of a sphere. The bottom one is the Neptune with the radius of 24,622. Then we have a clouds layer right on top that basically just has a 20 centimeter increase. So let's say like a 20 kilometers tall surface where the clouds are hanging. And then finally we have the atmosphere, which is 24,680. So another 40 kilometers further in the sky, that's where the atmosphere would be floating. Now we have a camera, and right now I was just making some fun renders, so I was playing around with a 800 millimeter. But let's put this to 1,500 and then do a little bit of a pushback. There you go. Here at the focus distance, I'm gonna click the arrow and then click in the center of the planet just to make sure that we're in focus. Now, the cool thing as well about using these incredibly long focal lengths is that it immediately creates that classic NASA space photography look, that super compressed, flat circle kind of look, you know. Not saying it's a flat planet, but you know what I'm saying. Now, inside of here, I have a Corona camera tag, which would be the camera tag for whatever render engine you're using. I am running an ISO of 800, a shutter speed of 1/1000, and I was playing with an f-stop of 16 to get it even more in focus. But based on what we just read, that would be an 11.8. Use photographic exposure is checked. I have a highlight compression of 1. I have a bloom and glare with the default settings, a sharpening with default settings, depth of field is turned on with some very basic settings as well, and that's it. Next, for the sun, checked the temperature slider as opposed to using a color or a sky color, and I've set the temperature to 6,500. This means we have a very white light, which would be the color of the sun in space with no filtration of any atmosphere or no kind of scattering of the lights. I have also increased the intensity of the sun to 10, which is something I tend to do when working with these planets. I noticed that using a shutter speed of 1/1000th is usually what happens in these Voyagers or space probes, Cassini, and all of those. They tend to use a very fast shutter speed because, by the way, they're also moving at like ridiculous speeds. Then the sun usually has to be quite intense to be able to get the values that we're after. Finally, I have also increased the size of the sun to 10. Now, this is something that usually I would recommend not to do. If you are working with a planet that's a solid planet, like Mercury in the previous tutorial, I would like to suggest you to use a very small sun source. You get a pretty harsh shadow, a very strong division between the bright and the dark side. Now, with a gaseous planet, because we're working with 3 layers that are stacked on top of each other, we are creating some seams when the light shines through them. So by increasing the size of the light to about 10, you're able to smooth out those seams, but at least you're not getting a stepping effect in the shadow. Cool. Let me quickly turn on the interactive renderer, and we can start looking at some of these textures. Ah, look at that. I always get this very childish feeling when I look at planets being rendered on my screen. It's just something that as a child I would love to be able to do, and it's crazy to see that it can be done. Let me crack open a beer and we'll open the Neptune texture over here. So what I did for Neptune is I created a corona volume material. And the thing that you want to be doing is have a pretty high light value in your absorption color. You want to be absorbing basically the bright white light and then scattering it into the color map of your texture. That way your white light will be changed into a blue scatter map. If I put this to 100% white, you'll see what happens. The entirety of the planet becomes black. The reason that that happens is because basically what it's saying is we are absorbing the pure bright white light from the sun, and what happens is nothing is left. So you always have to be working with at least a 99% value of white light. As you can see, it's crazy that that's the way that these things are calculated, but if you just lower it by 1%, suddenly you can see the planet. Because we're using such a bright value, we're also excluding the shadow. So we have to be lowering the whiteness value until we get to a value where the shadow map is still being calculated nicely and realistically, and we also don't darken the texture map too much. Just a quick tip, if you want to have some live results, just take the drop down menu over here and you can start playing around with the light value over here. If we get to around 74, that's kind of the value where I felt most comfortable with. And this is just having a picture, a reference picture of Neptune right next to it, and making sure that everything stays as close to what you're looking for as possible. And then here inside of the texture, this is the texture that I am using right now. If you really don't have $1 to spend, pause the video, take a screenshot, and I will try to figure out a way to either put this on a Google Drive link or something, and just be sure to check the description or either like a pinned comment down below. If not, there's definitely a link in the description to the ArtStation store and you can get it there. Now, the directionality is the next setting you want to play with. Now, I am leaving it basically on 0, but not on 0. You don't want to be touching the emission because obviously the planet doesn't emit light, but the one thing to really be playing around with is the absorption distance. So this basically makes sure that the planet is as solid as it is. If I were to increase this, let's say multiply it by 10, what would happen is the planet would become less solid. The higher the absorption distance, the more translucent this volume will become. And sure, it gives a very epic, quite interesting result, but if you're trying to make a planet, obviously this probably isn't what you're going for. But now light is traveling 1,500 centimeters into this volume and then scattering. So even in the shadowy areas, we're able to see quite a lot of things. Right now, it really gives a very interesting marble effect. But I have been working with a distance of 150 centimeters, so it's really just right at the surface of the planet that light gets entered, and then it starts getting absorbed and scattered, and everything starts working fine. For the clouds, this is just a very simple material, just a base material. And I have this cloud texture as a diffuse channel. Basically, the only thing I did is I went into Photoshop and I looked at all the areas where some cloud formations could be. And I took sections from a planet Earth cloud map and I painted them right on top. As I said before, I am going to do a volumetric cloud wrap around this planet, and then I'll be making probably another tutorial about that. So be sure to hit that subscribe button to check that out. On the opacity channel, I'm using that same cloud texture as it's a black and white texture anyways. And for displacement, I'm using the same thing. And in volumetrics, what I'm doing is I am absorbing the color and I am scattering the Neptune texture. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is it basically just makes sure that the clouds feel a bit more integrated into the planet as opposed of them feeling like planet Earth textures. Now, finally, we have the atmosphere texture. Just for you to be able to see this a little bit better, I'm going to be playing around with the sun position. So there you go. This is a nice way to see it. You can see this little bit of a brownish reddish ring right around the edges of the planet. If we zoom in very close to these reference images of Neptune, it's pretty difficult to tell what is the atmosphere and what is just chromatic aberration from the lens. Basically, what I found out is that a brownish reddish tint is what sits in the atmosphere of Neptune. Well, we create a volume material. We have a absorption color of, similar to the previous one, something around the 80% white, with a pretty short distance of just under 100 centimeters, because we don't want that atmosphere to be feeling super translucent. We want it to have some presence. And then in the scattering, we are using a Fresnel. Now, this is just a super cool trick. Basically, if you make sure that the Fresnel is black at the start and black at the end, it will kind of have a smooth fall off right at the edges, and it will have a complete fall off right to the center of where the camera is looking. And then you can kind of just play around with these values, somewhere around the 60% red and the 45% orange, and then transitioning into like a very grayish 25% orangey yellow, and then that moves on all the way to the other side of the hue to a 45% blue that then moves on into the black. Basically, the blue is just hazing out some of this planet a bit, the black is making it invisible, and then this yellow transitions into the reddish edge back to black. Well, cool. Now, that's everything you need to know for making this planet. Now, when it comes to lighting, there's absolutely anything you can do, right? So if you want, you can just do this. Just put the sun completely behind the planet and just shine it through the atmosphere, and it looks very epic. Those of you that are subscribers to the channel know that me and Eric and a bunch of other people have been working on a sci-fi short film, Syntactic Labyrinths, and basically we have a bunch of planet shots in that film. We like to play a lot with the shadowy part of the planet and just using the fully bright up version of the planet as super small distant planets, almost as if they're in between some of the stars. Now, that is just a cinematography preference. For you, whatever you want to do, just play around, have fun with it. You could also, just for the sake of argument, light this with something completely different, which isn't a sun source. And the results would be very different. So, just for the sake of argument, I'm going to add a HDRI lighting. Get something like this, just get like a photo studio and put on a intensity of 10. Now I am going to be increasing this intensity. Let's put that to 50. Cool, and now we can rotate the texture over here. Man, this is so weird. This is so weird. This feels illegal. Whatever, I don't know why, but this just feels wrong. Once you have this planet, it behaves pretty naturally. It behaves as close to what a planet should behave like inside of the software, I would say. Yeah, you can light it with an HDRI if you wanted. You could put it inside of a city center. You can do whatever you want. Let's get out of here and hop into After Effects for a little bit of compositing tips, and then we're out of here and we can all enjoy the rest of our evening. One thing I would like to mention first is that our Neptune does have a alpha channel. So because it's a volume, if you were to just import a EXR file, you can see over here that it has a alpha channel. Now, the way that I like to do it is I can either just duplicate it a few times and you would get rid of that alpha channel, or you can just basically duplicate the layer, go to color correction curves, go down to alpha, and then you can boost that up. Now over here, what I did is I added some organic star fields in the back. You can get those as well on the ArtStation store. Just come to me on ArtStation and then hop over to store. And then down here you have the 100 organic star fields back. I feel like I've been talking about these way too much, but you know. Then I have a black solid in the background, kind of just like as a background of the canvas. Then what I do is this blur map over here. If you look at most NASA pictures or most space pictures, you tend to see a little bit of a blurry fall off right at the edge of the planet. Because even though these super long lenses manage to compress space, these things are 26,600 and something kilometers in radius. So they are ginormous, and there's no way to be able to get the horizon line of the planet in the same focal plane as the front edge of the planet. So I create a black solid, then I create a new white solid with a circle that matches the shape of the planet. You can also just import the planet and then use a effect generate fill right on top of it. Then if you're using a mask, you can go for a feather. If you're using a generated fill, you could go for a Gaussian blur right on top. Then I duplicate this one and I make it black. And I also feather it. And what that gives is this little bit of a halo right here. And then finally, I have an adjustment layer with an exposure control that will make sure that we have the strength that we desire for the blur map. That pre-comp goes right into our composition, and then we have an adjustment layer that has the track matte set to luma matte. And here we have a camera lens blur with a blur radius of 5, just super default. And if you turn that on, as you can see, you just fall off those edges just enough to make it a more pleasing looking and believable shot. Finally, we have a adjustment layer with some color correction. Now this is basically what it looked like before. So then I have one exposure effect to brighten up that image so we have a bit more of a dramatic shot. And then I have a tritone effect. And with this, it's very easy to recreate a film stock look. Depending on the film stock that you like using or that you like the look of, what I like is a bit of a yellowish highlight and then a bit of a mid-dark greenish midtone and then some really dark purples in the shadowy area. This is basically what it does to your image, which looks cool on its own, but not what we're after. If you start increasing the blend with original, you start to be able to really control as much of the processing of the film that you would like to have on there. And a value of around 60-70% works really nicely for these types of shots. Because basically we're just working with black in the background and we have this strong blue planet. And that's it. That's basically everything you need to know about Neptune. Interesting gas giant, very nice colors. Be sure to come to the ArtStation store, check out if there's anything you like. The texture maps are here for $1. The project file is here for $2 in case you just want to skip the tutorial altogether and just use the files over here. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you enjoy this type of content, be sure to leave a like. Be sure to leave a comment of whatever you're interested in seeing next. Be sure to subscribe, especially if you want to stay up to date to the production of our sci-fi film Syntactic Labyrinths. So yeah, thank you very much. Have a great night. Have a great day. And cheers. Bye-bye.